All right, we're going to start our read aloud. So let's go ahead and go to our camera so that we can watch as I read along here. Well, you can watch this as I read. So Sideways Stories from Wayside School. And so we are on chapter 6. Oh goodness, I'm not sure what this is here. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, there we go. Oh goodness, all the computer glitches. All right. So this chapter is called BB. BB was a girl with short brown hair. Let me get it that way. Okay. With short brown hair, a little BB nose, totally tiny toes, and big brown eyes. Her full name was BB Gunn. She was the fastest draw in Mrs. Jewell's class. She could draw a cat in less than 45 seconds, a dog in less than 30, and a flower in less than 8 seconds. But of course, BB never drew just one dog or one cat or one flower. Art was from 12:30 to 1:30. Why, in that time, she could draw 50 cats, 100 flowers, 20 dogs, and several eggs or watermelons. It took her the same amount of time to draw a watermelon as an egg. Calvin sat next to BB. He didn't think he was very good at art. Why, it took him the whole period just to draw one airplane. So instead, he just helped BB. He was BB's assistant. As soon as BB would finish one masterpiece, Calvin would take it from her and set down a clean sheet of paper. Whenever her crayon ran low, Calvin was ready with a new crayon. That way, BB didn't have to waste any time. And in return, BB would draw 5 or 6 airplanes for Calvin. It was 12:30, time for art. BB was ready. On her desk was a sheet of yellow construction paper. In her hand was a green crayon. Calvin was ready. He held a stack of paper and a box of crayons. "Ready, BB?" said Calvin. "Ready, Calvin," said BB. "Okay," said Mrs. Jewell. "Time for art." She had hardly finished her sentence when BB had already drawn a picture of a leaf. Calvin took it from her and put another piece of paper down. "Red," called BB. Calvin handed BB a red crayon. "Blue," called BB. He gave her a blue crayon. They were quite a pair. Their teamwork was remarkable. BB drew pictures as fast as Calvin could pick up the old paper and set down the new. A fish, an apple, 3 cherries, bing, bing, bing. At 1:30, Mrs. Jewell announced, "Okay, class, art is over." BB dropped her crayon and fell over on her desk. Calvin sighed and leaned back in his chair. He could hardly move. They had broken their old record. BB had drawn 378 pictures. They lay in a pile on Calvin's desk. Mrs. Jewell walked by. "Calvin, did you draw all these pictures?" Calvin laughed. "No, I can't draw. BB drew them all." "Well then, what did you draw?" asked Mrs. Jewell. "I didn't draw anything," said Calvin. "Why not? Don't you like art?" asked Mrs. Jewell. "I love art," said Calvin. "That's why I didn't draw anything." Mrs. Jewell did not understand. "It would have taken me the whole period just to draw one picture," said Calvin, "and BB would only have been able to draw 100 pictures. But with the two of us working together, she was able to draw 378 pictures. That's a lot more art." BB and Calvin shook hands. "No," said Mrs. Jewell, "that isn't how you measure art. It isn't how many pictures you have, but how good the pictures are. Why, a person could spend his whole life just drawing one picture of a cat. In that time, I'm sure BB could draw 1,000,000 cats." 2,000,000, said BB. Mrs. Jewell continued, "But if that one picture is better than each of BB's 2,000,000, then that person has produced more art than BB." BB looked as if she was going to cry. She picked up all the pictures from Calvin's desk and threw them in the garbage. Then she ran from the room. "I thought her pictures were good," said Calvin. He reached into the garbage pail and took out a crumpled up picture of an airplane. Bibi walked outside into the playground. Louis, the yard teacher spotted her. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I'm going home to draw a picture of a cat," said Bibi. "Will you bring it to school and show me tomorrow?" Louis asked. "Tomorrow?" laughed Bibi. "By tomorrow I doubt if I even finished with one whisker." All right, so now we're going to talk about Calvin, the one that was helping Bibi. Calvin had a big round face. "Calvin," said Mrs. Jules, "I want you to take this note to Miss Zarves for me." "Miss Zarves?" asked Calvin. "Yes, Miss Zarves," said Mrs. Jules. "You know where she is, don't you?" "Yes," said Calvin. "She's on the 19th story." "That's right, Calvin," said Mrs. Jules. "Take it to her." Calvin didn't move. "Well, what are you waiting for?" asked Mrs. Jules. "She's on the 19th story," said Calvin. "Yes, we have already established that," said Mrs. Jules. "The 19th story," Calvin repeated. "Yes, Calvin, the 19th story," said Mrs. Jules. "Now take it to her before I lose my patience." "But, Mrs. Jules," said Calvin. "Now, Calvin," said Mrs. Jules, "unless you would rather go home on the kindergarten bus." "Yes, ma'am," said Calvin. Slowly he walked out the door. "Ha, ha, ha," laughed Terence. "Take it to the 19th story." "Give it to Miss Zarves," hooted Myron. "Have fun on the 19th story," called Jason. Calvin stood outside the door to the classroom. He didn't know where to go. As you know, when the builders built Wayside School, he accidentally built it sideways. But he also forgot to build the 19th story. He built the 18th and the 20th, but no 19th. He said he was very sorry. There was also no Miss Zarves. Miss Zarves taught the class on the 19th story, and since there was no 19th story, there was no Miss Zarves. And besides that, as if Calvin didn't have enough problems, there was no note. Mrs. Jules had never given Calvin the note. "Boy, this is just great," thought Calvin. "Just great. I'm supposed to take a note that I don't have to a teacher who doesn't exist and who teaches on a story that was never built." He didn't know what to do. He walked down to the 18th story, then back up to the 20th, then back down to the 18th, and back up again to the 20th. There was no 19th story. There never was a 19th story, and there will never be a 19th story. Calvin walked down to the administration office. He decided to put the note in Miss Zarves' mailbox. But there wasn't one of those either. That didn't bother Calvin too much, however, since he didn't have a note. He looked out the window and saw Louis, the yard teacher, shooting baskets. "Louis will know what to do," he thought. Calvin went outside. "Hey, Louis," Calvin called. "Hi, Calvin," said Louis. He tossed him the basketball. Calvin dribbled up and took a shot. He missed. Louis tipped it in. "Do you want to play a game?" Louis asked. "I don't have time," said Calvin. "I have to deliver a note to Miss Zarves up on the 19th story." "Then what are you doing all the way down here?" Louis asked. "There is no 19th story," said Calvin. "Then where is Miss Zarves?" asked Louis. "There is no Miss Zarves," said Calvin. "What are you going to do with the note?" asked Louis. "There is no note," said Calvin. "I understand," said Louis. "That's good," said Calvin, "because I sure don't." "It's very simple," said Louis. "You are not supposed to take no notes to no teachers. You already haven't done it." Calvin still didn't understand. "I'll just have to tell Miss Jules that I couldn't deliver the note," he said. "That's good," said Louis. "The truth is always best. Besides, I don't think I understand what I said either." Calvin walked back up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jules' class. "Thank you very much, Calvin," said Mrs. Jules. Calvin said, "But Mrs. Jules interrupted him. "That was a very important note, and I'm glad I was able to count on you." "Yes, but you see," said Calvin, "you delivered the note to Miss Zarves on the 19th story." "Oh, excuse me, let me read that again. "You delivered the note to Miss Zarves on the 19th story?" asked Jason. "How did you do it?" "What do you mean, how did he do it?" said Mrs. Jules. "He gave Miss Zarves the note. Some people, Jason, are responsible." But you see, Mrs. Jules, said Calvin, the note was very important, said Mrs. Jules. I told Miss Zarves not to meet me for lunch. Don't worry, said Calvin. She won't. Good, said Mrs. Jules. I have a coffee can full of Tootsie Roll Pops on my desk. You may help yourself to one for being such a good messenger. Thanks, said Calvin, but really, it was nothing. It really was nothing. And the last one we're going to read today is Myron. Myron had big ears. He was elected class president. The children in Mrs. Jules' class expected him to be a good president. Other presidents were good speakers. Myron was even better. He was a good listener. But he had a problem. He didn't know what a class president was supposed to do. So he asked, "What am I supposed to do?" "It's a difficult job," said Mrs. Jules, "but you can do it. You must turn the lights on every morning and turn them off at the end of the day." "What?" asked Myron. "As a class president, you must learn to listen," said Mrs. Jules. I'll repeat myself. Let me start right here. I'll repeat myself only one more time. You must turn the lights on every morning. "I heard you the first time," said Myron. "It just doesn't sound like much of a job." "It certainly is," said Miss Jules. "Without light, I can't teach, and the children can't learn. Only you can give us that light. I think it is a very important job." "I guess so," said Myron. He wasn't convinced. "Here, let me show you how to work a light switch," said Mrs. Jules. "I already know how," said Myron. "I've been turning lights on and off all my life." "Very good," said Mrs. Jules. "You'll make a fine president." Myron wanted to be the best president ever, but it was such an easy job, he thought that anybody could do it. When school let out that day, Myron stayed behind. He turned out the light by flicking the switch down. "Excellent," said Mrs. Jules. On his way home, Myron heard a horrible noise. First there was a loud screeching, then a sharp squeal, a roaring engine, and then the very faint sound of a girl crying. Myron ran to see what had happened. Dana was bent over in the middle of the road. "What's the matter?" asked Myron. "My dog Pugsy was hit by a car," Dana cried. "Who did it?" asked Myron. "I don't know," Dana sobbed. "They sped away." "Well, that's not important," said Myron. "We've got to try to save Pugsy." Pugsy lay unconscious in the street. Myron carefully picked her up. He carried her 2 miles to the vet. Dana cried at his side. "Don't worry, Dana," said Myron. "She'll be all right." But he wasn't really so sure. He gave Pugsy to the vet, walked Dana home, and then walked home himself. Dana was so upset that she forgot to thank him. Myron didn't mind. He thought that was what being class president was all about. The next morning, before he went to school, Myron went to Dana's house. Pugsy was there. She seemed all right. Dana petted her. Pugsy licked her face. "See, Myron, she's all right," said Dana. "The vet said you brought her just in time." "Hi, Pugsy," said Myron. He petted her. Pugsy bit his hand. "I guess she doesn't know you," said Dana. "She was unconscious yesterday when you saved her life." Dana's mother put some medicine and a Band-Aid on Myron's hand. Then she drove the children to school. They were late. They ran up the stairs to Mrs. Jules' class. The room was completely dark. "It's about time you got here, Myron," said Mrs. Jules. "We have no lights." "Why didn't somebody else turn them on?" asked Myron. "Because you're class president," said Mrs. Jules. "Show Stephen how to work the lights. From now on, he will be class president." Myron showed Stephen how to turn on the lights. He flicked the switch up. At the end of the day, Myron showed Stephen how to turn the lights off. He flicked the switch down. After a week, Stephen finally caught on. He made a good president. The lights were on every morning. Myron, who was president for only a day, was the best president in the history of Wayside School. It was just that nobody knew it. All right. So we will continue our read aloud tomorrow. I hope that you are enjoying it. I think it's a fun story, and there's a lot of silliness that goes on in that story. All right. All right, guys, so I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope that you're reading a book at home as well. Reading is a lot of fun, and it can take you to places that you could never go. And imagine all kinds of things. So keep reading while you're home because that's very, very important. All right, until tomorrow when we start our next chapter, I'll see you then.